All right, everybody. Hey, we are back with our next guest speaker here on Social Media Day 2022. And I've known this guy for a couple of years, and I was excited to have him speak today because I know that many of you guys and gals that are out there watching this or listening to this, you're kind of you get your feet in two worlds. You're probably working in the main 9-to-5 career and looking to do something outside of that, transitioning. And that's what we get from a lot of folks, like, oh, this is so helpful because it gave me help in transitioning out of what I was doing to what I really want to do. Or you're trying to launch something and you're not sure where to begin or where to start or how to set some things up. And so we're honored to have my buddy Larry Roberts here. He is as I joke, he's the chief bottle washer over Readily Random Media, but he is the man, the myth behind Podcast Boost. And this guy has gone through a transition, not like the Kyle Jenner transition or anything like that. I got to be careful about saying that word.
It's 2022, Scott. Be careful.
That's exactly right. We don't want the trolls and the haters jump on here. But what I'm getting at is this guy has evolved his message and his marketing, really honed it in from when we first met. So we're honored to have Larry Roberts join us just from I-35 here in Texas and up in the Dallas market. So what's going on, Larry? How you doing today?
And it's another exciting day, and I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So that's always a good thing, though. That means I'm busy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll take 30 minutes to let your head reattach here.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's funny because I was in the middle of doing something. I looked at the clock 20 minutes ago. I thought, I have got to just kind of chill out and refocus and get prepped to be on this podcast with Scott. So I had to yank the hoodie off and I popped me a nice little Pellegrino, sat back, turned on some very comforting tunes, and just kind of refocused. So I'm ready to go.
Well, good stuff there. Well, let's talk about the transition. Now, for those of you, you may not recognize Larry if you're not in the podcast space. We get folks of all types there, but Larry is probably one of the biggest hustlers. I would say maybe hustling second only to the man from Podfest, Chris Kremositz. You are all over the place, and I mean this in a good way, not in a bad like all over your message. You're very targeted. You've really upped your brand, and that's what I really want you to talk about here on Social Media Days. Kind of that transition, the thought process, because you're doing one thing as early as 24, 36 months ago. Now it's really kind of been a whole 180, 360 change. So let me talk a little bit about that, where you were and kind of what led to you wanting to be really more focused on where you're at.
Yeah, if we go back 24, 36 months, I was still in corporate America. I was still doing my 9-to-5 and podcasting on the side, still trying to figure out, as you alluded to, where I was going with this whole thing. I knew podcasting was a very powerful medium, and I knew it had a ton to offer in a variety of different ways, but I didn't exactly know what that was. And I was, I had written a book 3 years ago called 1+1 = Podcast. I tell people not to buy it because I wouldn't buy it, but
it's changed a lot since then, hasn't it? Right?
It's changed a lot since then. And I've changed a lot since then too. Writing that book, I had a particular goal in mind, and it was really the start of establishing a personal brand. And some of the things that I had seen with people that had strong personal brands is they typically have a book, they typically have a course, they typically have a podcast, they typically have a website. And so starting to realize that all of these things, you would find them in all of these influencers, I thought, well, I got to start somewhere. And I started literally 3.5 years ago by writing that book. And, I really didn't have as firm a grasp on the podcast space as I do today. Now, granted, the book, it served its purpose. It would tell you how to start a podcast, and you could still follow the book today and start a podcast. Some of the technology that I reference in the book is outdated. Some of it's even obsolete, but the concepts are still there. But I really wasn't in a position to be talking about it because I just didn't have the experience or really the exposure to be talking on a level where I'm trying to teach it to somebody else. But I wrote the book. I hired a coach. It became an Amazon number one bestseller in 4 different categories. I bragged about that for a long time, and then I realized it's really just some basic math, and anybody can be an Amazon number one bestseller. So unless I'm getting on the New York Times, I don't say much about that one. But from there, I built a course also, 1+1 = Podcast. I have it out on Udemy. It's been out there for several years. It sold quite well and helped a lot of people start their podcast. After I had done the book, I actually met a course creation coach. So I hired a coach, and I worked with Ellie Natoli, and we put together that course, and it's still out there today. Same scenario as the book, though. It's a little dated, and I do need to update it, but trying to find the time right now to do a Udemy course is a little tough. But the process continued to evolve. I started landing these small speaking gigs on some small localized events or some small virtual events. And this was even before virtual events were cool. But that started allowing me to start to hone my message and start to understand the industry better and start to make relationships, create these relationships with event organizers and event planners and real influencers in the podcasting space. And as I did that and built these relationships, I started learning, I started absorbing. And it's funny, you brought up Chris Kremitzos, and Chris is a great friend of mine. And I owe a lot of what I'm doing now to Chris Kremitzos. You know, I'm the editor in chief of the Podfest Messenger, which is one of the largest industry newsletters for podcasters in the space. And that's Chris's newsletter. It's part of the Podfest offerings. So thanks to Chris, I really started getting honed in. Thanks to Chris, also, I met my podcasting coach back in 2020. Matter of fact, I think that's when you and I met in person, was at Podfest 2020. Yep. And I also met
we'd already talked before.
Yeah, we had known each other. Yeah. I think I was actually on your show or something at the time, even back then.
You were on the Mass Media Podcast Summit that we did back in originally in 2020.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, you were one of the first ones to give me a stage. So I owe a lot to you as well, because you allowed me to start building my personal brand and start getting some recognition and some exposure. So like I say, at Podfest, I met David Hooper. David Hooper's still to this day my podcasting coach. He's given me a ton of direction and really guided me along the process and helped me hone my message and hone my brand. And I mean, so many other people have been there along the way. But this led up to January 4th of last year. I was able to leverage my positioning within the space to walk away from my 21-year career with the same company. So I walked away from corporate America with Readily Random Media, which is still my company today. And I went into content creation and podcast consulting full time. But even that, you know, Scott, you alluded to this a minute ago, I was still floundering a little bit. I kind of went out there on a wing and a prayer and a little COVID. Because
well, here's the thing. Those weren't my words.
Yeah.
Those were I remember the post. I remember reaching out to say, hey man, you're going to do fine. You're on the right path. You're in that no man's land that we all find ourselves as entrepreneurs and digital creators at some point. Like, which path do I take? Do I take the left path, the right, or do I choose the door in the middle? Which way do I go? You know what I mean?
Yep. Or you just stand there and spin in circles, which is kind of what I was doing. Not sure where I'm going to get off this ride. But, you know, and I mentioned COVID, but COVID actually helped speed things up and help my transition in the fact that a lot of the events, and I was alluding to smaller virtual events here in, you know, last year in 21, we saw big, massive podcasting conferences that were all virtual. I mean, Podfest set 2 Guinness World Records last year for the largest podcasting conferences. And I had the opportunity to speak there. And that started opening up other speaking opportunities. And some of the other conferences that weren't quite as COVID conscious as maybe they should have been at the time, they were live. And being from Texas, I don't think we have COVID here in Texas. So I went ahead and headed out. So I went to these conferences and took the opportunity to speak live on stage. And those stage opportunities opened up more stage opportunities. And here we are in 22, while some people are still COVID conscious, and they should be, but not nearly as much as they were last year. There's a lot more live stages that are opening up. And this year, I think I've been on 9 across the country, traveling from California to New Jersey and everywhere in between, getting on stages, talking about podcasting, promoting podcasting, and promoting my own personal brand.
So let's take that back there. When you were sitting down, when you started talking with David, podcast, David Hooper, and what are some of the things? Are there things that kind of shocked you, or things like, okay, that makes sense, I need to do? Did he give you a list of some things that you need to work on, or things that you need to identify? Because I want to find out where the red hat came in, because that has become literally like your calling card in its own.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll tell you exactly where it came from. And David didn't really have much input here, but Alex Sanfilippo, I think you know Alex. Alex Sanfilippo, I owe it all to him, in all honesty, because what was happening was, well, Scott, I turned 50 in August of this year. So here we are. We're just a couple of months from over the hill. But the podcasting space, there's still a lot of younger generations that are getting into the space. And I wanted to be able to a lot more younger people that are podcasting than there are older people, unless they've already been in the business for a while. So what I was doing was, matter of fact, I think I probably can't reach it here, but I have a red Supreme hat. So I bought Supreme's a brand that all those wacky kids are wearing these days. So I spent about 150 bucks on this. It's just a ball cap, just a red ball cap that says Supreme on it. And I was wearing that everywhere, every stage I was on. It was on my business cards. I was wearing the red hat. So I was already kind of using a personal brand of sorts. But I spoke at Podfest Origins in Orlando. No, it was in Tampa in November of last year. And I came down off stage, and Alex and I have got to be pretty good friends. He pulled me to the side and he goes, "Hey, bro, why are you giving Supreme all this love?" I was like, "What do you mean? I'm just trying to relate to a younger audience." He goes, "Are they sponsoring you?" And I'm like, "No, of course they're not sponsoring me. I wish they were." He goes, "Well, then drop the Supreme. Just grab a red hat, because the red hat, it stands you with it on. You're a big guy, you're tall, and you're, about 240. So I'm a pretty big guy as well. So I stand out in a crowd because there's no reason to wear the brand." So I went home, I ditched the high dollar hat, went on Amazon, bought a $6 red hat and put it on. And it has just grown exponentially. The awareness of who I am and where I am and how I'm doing things has blown up because of the red hat. And granted, that's not all that a personal brand is comprised of, is one piece of clothing, but the impact that just changing to a red hat has had. I mean, I was at Bitcoin Miami in April of this year, an event that had 35,000 people in attendance. And over the course of 3 days, I had multiple people walk up to me, go, "Bro, I saw you. I knew it was you because I saw the red hat." Here I am in a city that I don't even live in, and an event with 35,000 people, and they're picking me out in this massive crowd, and they're identifying me and what I do because of the red hat. They know I'm the podcast guy. I'm the red hat guy. So it's been tremendous as far as extending my reach and that recognition that so many of us are looking for.
Well, that's got to make you feel good to be picked out of so many people at a big event. It's kind of why we like the green color when we get into the real estate aspect of it. And green has been our branding, and it's a little thing, but it stands out because it catches people's eyes, and it's an easy thing to start associating oneself with a color. And I just don't think enough people do that. You know what I mean, Larry?
Yeah, 100%. But it's hard too, because I think we overthink it. I mean, you saw the thought that I put into wearing the damn Supreme hat. It's like, okay, I want to talk to younger people, so and then I dropped big coin on a stupid hat. And I put all this thought into why I'm going to do this, when really just a simple identifier made all the difference in the world. So a lot of times we invest way too much time trying to figure out where we fit in. And this goes back to the A word that we like to use, authenticity. If we are just who we are and we just live off of our own brand, which is us, then we're going to stand out in a crowd 100% of the time anyhow. I mean, I've always been a hat guy. I've always had it tilted to the right, just about 15 degrees. I mean, it's just where it works for me. So once I quit relying on another brand or another persona to make me stand out and just started being me, man, tremendous effort, and it made a tremendous impact in the long run.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing is so many, and as we all start off, I mean, we are literally walking brand billboards. If we're like, I've got an Under Armour shirt on, you've got a hoodie on, you've got some other things in the background, stuff like that. We all do that for a variety of things. Who we shop with, the alcohol we drink, or the drinks that we're taking shots of, or where we eat at, or who we bank with. We are all different things, but yeah, you got to learn to kind of take the step back and learn to leverage, like, hey, I need to put my step forward because hey, if Supreme's not taking care of me, or Under Armour's not taking care of me, this is valuable real estate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For folks out there. What are some of the things besides that when you started talking with David and starting kind to hone in that message? You talked about wanting to focus on a younger audience. What kind of research did you do? What kind of stuff did you do for your branding to help identify that? Besides the hat, what else are some of the things that you did there, Larry? That those out there that are making that conversion, leaving careers like you did.
Sure. A lot of it was trial and error. And I wish I was more of the thought-provoking kind of guy, but I'm really the guy that just jumps in the trenches and shows up and sees what works. I show up and I go, oh, well, shit, that didn't work. Let me try this. And that's really kind of how I did it. Like I said, I stepped out last year. January 4th was my last day. I stepped out into content creation and coaching. And the approach that I was taking really wasn't right. I was doing a lot on Clubhouse at the time. It was the hot ticket, and that's where people were going to drum up leads and do conversions and find clients. And, I found some clients on Clubhouse, but I also realized that they were and I don't mean this disrespectful, but they were not high ticket clients.
I use it. I use the term dead wood.
Dead wood. Where do I know that from? Oh, from
That's the Boiler Room, baby.
yes,
That's
from Boiler Room. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I know that movie. I love that movie. It's one of my favorites, as a matter of fact. So, but that's what I was finding. I was really finding a lot of dead wood, and it wasn't supporting my efforts. So I had to look back and go, okay, I know I have a good message. I know podcasting can be very beneficial for everybody. I know branded podcasts, that's where a lot of action's happening right now. I see a lot of brands, I see a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations that are using podcasts to get their message out. Maybe I need to work with them. So that's what I started doing. I started changing my messaging. I started talking about leveraging a podcast to grow your brand and reach your audience in a new way. And I started taking that message to the stage, whether it was a virtual stage or whether it was a live stage. And I just started showing up. That's so absolutely critical, to just simply show up, be everywhere you can be. Does it require a lot of effort? You bet it does. Is it tiresome, especially for a dude that's about to turn 50? You bet it is. But guess what? It had a tremendous impact. Once I made that transition from finding individual clients, and I kind of separate the two. You've got your hobbyist podcaster, which I'm more than happy to help any hobbyist podcaster just pull the trigger and get started. Just grab a mic and start recording and really get their show off the ground. So many people are scared to just do that. And that's the first step. But for me personally, that's not the audience or clientele that I'm looking for. So I changed my message to fit the audience that typically has a budget. So if they have a budget to spend, then we can start talking about how we can work together to grow or establish their podcast and get their brand out there in a new way and reach a brand new audience. So everything that I've done has been trial and error. Now, that's not to discredit David. David has done his damnedest to make sure that I own my message. And he said, man, you got to do this. You got to do that. You've got to get specific. You got to be authentic. You've got to share your message. You got to share your message, not just your branding message, but your human message. You've got to start sharing that, because if you listen to some of my old podcasts, very little of Larry shows up. It's really just a focus on the guest. And I go, okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Well, what about this? That's all you got out of me. But once I started realizing that people need to know who I am to put any confidence in me, to put any confidence in my message, and have any confidence in my ability to get them where they want to go with their show, I had to start sharing my story as well. So you started hearing a little bit more of Larry, and I started becoming more and more comfortable with sharing Larry. And I was just on a podcast earlier today where we went really deep into some personal Larry story, and Scott, back in 2013, I went into rehab for alcohol, and I've been sober ever since, but that's just skimming the surface of that story. There was a whole lot of drama that was leading up, and a lot of recovery after the fact as well. But I never spoke about that. I never shared that. I never dug into that. And once I started exposing my underbelly a little bit and getting real and getting raw and letting people see who I am and really understand my brand, understand where I came from as compared to where I'm at and where I'm going today, they get that realization that it's not beyond their reach. They can do the same thing no matter where you're at in the past. What you're doing today and what you can do in the future isn't defined by what happened to me in 2013. Where I'm at today, that 2013 dude doesn't even exist anymore. So once they started realizing that, and they knew that I had the experience to back up this branding talk that I'm always giving, it started resonating, and I started making progress, and I started getting clients, and I started seeing growth in my business. And now I'm sponsoring events and going to events and being brought in to speak at events. I'm being flown out to Florida here in a couple of weeks to be on a podcast. They're bringing me out to be on the show, and they're paying me to be there. So that's the thing that starts happening when you start sharing, once you really start establishing and building and exposing who you are and your brand.
That's such such key ingredients in honestly connecting with an audience. You can't be that robot that's perfect all the time. We all make mistakes. We've all had shit happen to us, good, bad. You have to really sort of share that, because people identify, especially if they're listening to us or following us on social media or watching our YouTube videos or listening to our podcast episodes. They're really we're building rapport with them without really trying. And there's a lot of folks out there that want to have, as I say, the Instagram gloss over on everything. Everything's perfect on Instagram, right? Everything's perfect about life. That's not the case. Shit happens.
Yeah.
And sharing that, I think a lot of people are scared to share those intimate moments because they think it's going to cause them to look weak. when honestly it really builds strength and show that you've got a thicker skin, or that you did overcome troubles, and look at you now. That's what we want. We don't want to deal with people who hit the first little hurdle and fell and collapsed. We want to work with those that busted through doors and overcome obstacles.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my camera just locked up a few minutes ago, so I mean, that's the reality of it. Shit happens, just like you said. And it's what we do with it in the long run that makes all the difference in the world. And that's authenticity. Authenticity. There we go. I did it again. That's authenticity. There you go. That's real. That's what people relate to and resonates with other individuals, is being able to share that. And it's not being authentic doesn't mean that if you drop F-bombs every other word in your personal life, that you go onto your podcast and you drop F-bombs every other word. You go, oh, I can't do that. Well, I'm not being authentic. That's not your authentic self.
The world only needs one Gary Vaynerchuk for that.
Yes. And that is his authentic self. I promise you, if you get around that cat, he's doing the same thing whether the cameras are on or off.
Yep, he does.
He's authentic. We're not all Gary V, that's for sure. I wish I was. I mean, the dude's got it nailed down. And, he's pretty well off these days. So I'm a little envious in that regard, too. But you're right. There's only one. And guess what? There's only one Scott Carson. There's only one Larry Roberts. There's only one Chris Krimitsos. There's only one David Hooper. There's only one of you.
Amen to that. And that's, you have to identify with that. Now, tweaking that up there, you started getting into your brand, started identifying that stuff. What are some things that maybe are daily habits that maybe you've developed over the last 2 years that are different than what you were doing when you first started out?
I think a lot of the messaging is much more consistent. So I make sure that my messaging is consistent every day. There was a time back, if you go back just a couple of years on social media, and it's funny because, Facebook always gives you these memories, and you see some of these posts that you made. And I look at them today from like 3 years ago, and I go, what was I doing posting that nonsense? That wasn't in any way beneficial to what I'm trying to do or promote me or promote my business or promote podcasting in any way. It's just some random nonsense. So while I still try to mix in some fun videos here and there with my TikToks and my reels and that sort of thing, it's still on brand. It's still on message. So I make sure that I'm conveying that message consistently across the board. Everything that I do has to be consistent, and everything that we do, especially if you just look at a podcast. So many times people want to grow their show, but if you start digging into their show a little bit, you'll notice that they have a name, and then they have a description that doesn't really support the name. Yep. Then they'll have an intro that doesn't really support the description or the name. Then you go to their website, and their website's a wreck. It doesn't tie into anything. There's no consistency. So that's one of the biggest things that I did. Earlier this year, I just invested in a brand new website. So I hired a company, and did I want to put that money into that website? No. And I probably still paid more for it than I should have. Probably could have got somebody to do just as good a job a little bit cheaper. But I found a company that I trusted and I knew was going to do a phenomenal job and give me the presentation that I wanted on my website. And I invested in that, because I can't sit here and start talking about consistency and start talking about branding. Then when people dig into me, they go, oh, this cat, he didn't even have his own backyard together. So how do we put any confidence in him? So that's been the biggest thing for this year, is establishing that consistency across the board in everything that I do. And when I wake up every day, that message is the same. I want to make sure that I'm consistent.
Now let's talk a little bit more into the content. Yeah, I totally agree. The consistency, you got to have, like, as I like to say, like the four corners tied down. You got to have your foundation. Otherwise, if you're sharing one thing and it's different over here, it's going to be a wobbly kind of foundation. It's like a chair that one leg is shorter or longer than the rest. It just doesn't work. You can't squeeze sweet and low packets under the leg when you're podcasting business or your marketing aspect. You know what I mean?
No, you can't.
So let's talk about, you looked at your stuff, you got everything organized. Now, what does a week look like for Larry Roberts now, and when it comes to marketing and the content that you're creating? Can you give some nuts and bolts? Like, how often are you posting to socials? Or are you using automation? Are you recording bulk commenting and then just rescheduling? How's that kind of work around, especially with you're traveling so much lately? How's that happening?
It's very, very difficult. And in full disclosure, I haven't published a podcast episode since April 19th. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. It's not because I'm trying to not be consistent in my content, right, but I was also changing gears. So I'm planning on launching a new podcast, and it was supposed to have already launched. And I'll tell you why it didn't launch. It didn't launch because the new podcast is called Bitcoin Impact. And if we look back about 3 weeks ago, the whole world just collapsed.
Yeah, I think I hear that bomb going off still.
Yeah. So we were actually going to launch the show about 3 weeks ago, and the whole bottom fell out of the crypto space. So what I found was a lot of my guests, they're not in as quite a good position as they once were. So I've got some content that's recorded that I'm not real comfortable releasing right now.
Mhm.
So I've kind of dialed that back, and I'm not sure exactly how we're going to move forward with Bitcoin Impact. But for right now, I'm podcastless. My podcast was You're the Boss. And again, the episodes are out there on the website. You can always listen to them on iTunes or any of your other podcast providers. But from a podcast perspective, not consistently creating content right now because I'm in that transition phase. But
Yeah.
as far as social media goes, right now I'm involved in a 21-day video challenge where we create at least 1-minute videos every day. So that's the type of thing that I'm doing. A lot of those videos, they are going to this private group, but some of them I also convert to Reels. I try to make sure that I do one of those with a reinforcing message so that I can take that content, repurpose it on Reels, repurpose it on TikTok, repurpose it on Facebook, and I can fulfill my obligations as part of this 21-day challenge, all while creating my content as well. And I think that's one of the tricks of the trade is that we as content creators and as full-time content producers, podcast producers, business owners, entrepreneurs, investors, we don't really have the time to sit back and create content. So we have to find a way to create that content that fulfills multiple goals at the same time. And that's exactly what I'm doing today.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, one thing that stood out to me is when you're going to an event, whether you're speaking or attending, you take some time and create infographics about where you're going, and you share that on your banners, on your socials, and all that stuff there too. And so few people do that in a lot of cases, and that helps people be aware of where you're going and what you're doing in a lot of cases too. Have you had any feedback about that?
Dude, tremendous feedback. Everybody that sees that, they end up messaging me. I started this year. I started doing it late last year. When I would go to an event, I would create a new Facebook cover image and usually an Instagram post to show where I'm going to be next, I'll be here next. I'll be there next. I'll be here next. My DMs blew up and they're like, dude, how are you getting all these gigs? How is it that you are everywhere? And they wouldn't be asking that if I wasn't marketing myself and spreading that message that look what I'm doing, guys. And I know that's hard at times too. But I don't remember who it was, but I think it was Grant Cardone that says, if we don't market ourselves, who's going to market us? So we have to kind of put ourselves out there a little bit more. And it can be uncomfortable. I mean, I don't like talking about myself too much, but we have to do it.
Bullshit.
It's just what we have to do. So I'll tell you the impact that those cover images and just the Instagram posts of where I'm going to be next not only resonates with the audience that's watching what I'm doing, but it resonates with the audience of those events. When I get there, they feel like they kind of know that I'm going to be there. So like, oh, I saw your post here or there. The event organizers, they love it because I'm giving them free press. I'm marketing the event. I'm marketing the audience. I'm marketing myself. Again, multi-purpose content that's really helping a lot of people in the process.
Now, have you approached any of those events for affiliate codes, discount codes to provide out as a win-win marketing tactic as well?
I haven't done that, not saying that it's not a viable tactic, but one of the things that I'm working on doing myself is becoming a paid speaker. And I've just started to cross over that hump. That's one of my long-term goals. I actually just invested in coaching, and you'll see that's consistent through my messaging as well. I have coaches for everything. Again, podcast coach, video coach. I have a social media coach. I have a speaking coach. I have a business coach. And I just hired a TEDx coach. So I want to give a TEDx talk within the next 12 months. And a matter of fact, tomorrow starts one of my first intensive training sessions. It's a 2-day session where we're just really digging in and trying to get that message honed in. So that's why I hired them. I know I've got a message. I know it can be impactful, but I don't really know how to construct it. So I hired a coach to help me do that. And that's my long-term goal, is to take and parlay all this speaking that I'm doing these days into becoming a paid speaker and paid speaking gigs.
So let's take it one step further. You want to be that, but what is after that? What is the paid speaker for? What if we look at your 5-year goals, 10-year goals from now, Larry Roberts? Those interview questions. Where do you see your message taken? Yes, being a paid speaker is great. Been there, done that. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But also, are you looking just for a fee? Are you looking more so like with coaching, selling products along with that? Selling your services? Is it a mixture of both? What are you looking at?
It's a mixture of all the above, but the most of it is impacting people. I know, and we've skimmed over the surface of my story, but my story goes way back to 1972 when I came out of the womb with a birth defect, and I should have died by 74, but I had surgery that saved my life, so I shouldn't even be here. So there's that near-death experience. In 2013, before I went to rehab, literally was on my couch about to die. And I had some sort of moment of clarity. It was a voice in my head. I don't know what said it or where it came from, but it said, if you don't get help today, you're going to die tomorrow. And I believe that. That is 100% the case. Because when I reached out and called my friend to get help and they came to get me and take me to rehab, they couldn't even stabilize my vitals. They had to take me from the rehab facility to the hospital. They called an ambulance and rushed me to the hospital. So I was literally on the verge of death then. So that's two near-death experiences that I look back and go, there's a purposeful layer here. And I know there's a lot more to the story that could impact others and help them find their way and find their message. So that's rule number one. But rule number two is also I stepped out of corporate America. I do want to make money. We kind of got to have that. So that's part of the goal as well. The TEDx coach, it's twofold. I'm going to do the TEDx speech, but in the process, I'm narrowing down my message and I'm really refining that message. And I'm going to write my book. So I've been talking about writing another book for the last 2 years, but a real book this time. So I'm going to use this opportunity to get the coaching to refine that message, write the book, and write the TEDx speech, and convert both of those over to more robust speaking opportunities that are going to impact people. They're going to obviously sell books. That's obviously going to sell my services. That's obviously going to build my business. I'm obviously going to continue to build my brand and leave that legacy that so many of us are trying for.
I love it. I love it. I want to flip it here on its head here a little bit.
Yeah.
Leaving something after 21 years.
Yeah.
It's a little stressful.
Very.
What has your wife said? Was your wife supportive of that? Was she nervous Nelly? How did that because I know there's a lot of folks out there that with the great resignation we have going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
People worried about their jobs and inflation and stuff like that, fears. Yeah, you did a little bit before that now, but it still doesn't make any less stressful, right?
No, not at all. And my wife, super, super 1000% supportive. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't get it, but she supports it because she's the old schooler. She's used to going to work 9 to 5, get your paycheck, come home, do your home stuff, go back to work Monday through Friday, and just make sure that everything is safe and secure. Mm-hmm. And that's never really resonated that well with me. So even throughout that 21-year tenure, I owned multiple businesses, multiple side hustles. I was always doing something on the side. And I actually built a pool business in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, actually mid single digit 2000s, that got to the size where I was either going to have to walk away from corporate then and do the pool business full time or sell the business. But at the time, I lacked the testicular fortitude to take that step. So I ended up selling the business, putting a little money in my pocket and just continuing that 9 to 5. But after rehab and coming back and rejoining the workforce, I was really, really lost. And I didn't feel like I had my place in the workforce anymore. While the company that I worked for, super supportive, I could not have asked for more support from such a tremendous organization. But I still had tarnished my reputation. I had tarnished my brand in the workforce. Because people knew, even though you weren't supposed to talk about it in the office, that guy, he went to rehab. So I always felt like it was an uphill battle to get back at that respect level that I once had within the organization. Sure. And I was pretty tainted. I mean, I wasn't going to climb the ladder anymore. I was where I was going to be. Granted, they allowed me to stay, which they didn't need to by any means, but I wasn't going anywhere. And that led to a bit of a depression on my part. And the fact that I had come into podcasting shortly after coming home from rehab, I knew that this was a medium that I just loved. So I needed to learn how to leverage this. And that's what I started doing. And while I wasn't looking to get out January 4th of last year, I thought it was really going to be this year before I was going to be able to position myself to take that leap. Again, COVID came into play and it just kind of sped things up. I thought it was going to slow things down. I thought, man, I'm going to be here for another 2 to 3 years because of this. But because of the changes that we saw in the industry and the opportunities that opened up with virtual events and virtual opportunities, it actually sped things up. And my wife and I, we talked about it. I made a lot of changes. We paid off a lot of our debt. We paid off our cars. I sold my Cat Daddy Jeep. I had the baddest custom Jeep you ever seen in your life. Sold that as part of the deal. That was part of the agreement. Larry, if you want to step out, you got to get rid of the Jeep. It's just going to sit in the garage anyways. Why make the payment and pay on the insurance? You're not going anywhere. You work from home. So I agreed to it. Today, we still have one car. but that car's paid for. It's still fairly brand new. It's got like 15,000 miles on it. So, I mean, that's here for a long time. No debt really, other than our mortgage. So we positioned ourselves to make this thing a successful run as best as we possibly could. And as long as I had all those pieces in place, she was 100% supportive. Now, when I did my taxes last year and we looked at the money I made last year, she was not quite as supportive. But with this year, the way it is right now, I've already surpassed my salary that I used to be getting in corporate America, but from the time that I left. So this year, it's tremendously different. And of course, that makes her a lot more supportive once again. But
well, but there's something to be said about that. Is a lot of folks, they don't look at tightening the belt.
Yeah,
they think they're just going to keep running with it and running with it. And you have to make sacrifices. Sometimes it's not going to the movie. Sometimes it is selling a car, maybe paying something off, or eating at home for a little bit, not eating maybe top ramen every night, but you know, it's not like college days back in the day. But
no.
But that says a lot in commitment.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, is one thing that really is lacking in today's world. I think a lot of folks out there, they lack that commitment. They lack the balls to stick with something and have the patience to work through it. And that's why I'm really glad that you've been on here talking about this and being open and sharing this stuff, because I think it's one of the most important things. Entrepreneurship is not an easy hustle.
No.
You know, and if you're blessed to have a job, you can build a runway if you do the things, you put the work in, the trial and errors, the not being afraid to fall flat in your face, because we've all done it at some point, making things happen. So I love that you're sharing this. I think this is one of the most valuable messages of Social Media Day so far from our speakers. It's because it's important. I think everybody thinks when they see up on stage that they think everything, he's got it made.
Yeah.
They don't see the rehab. They don't see the 9-10 years of dealing with that and dragging that behind us in a lot of cases, until the point where you're able to let it go and be open about it. And there is a true liberty and freedom that comes with that, being able to express it like that. Huh, Larry?
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, I mean, Elsa said it best, let it go. You just said it yourself. And sometimes, sometimes we have to let it go. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that I do a little bit differently, especially with my message when it comes to sobriety and recovery. And I don't fault anyone for their approach to their own sobriety.
Right.
This, for me personally, this is what works for me, and this is only for me. I'm not trying to push it off on anybody else, but that's exactly what I did. When I stepped out of rehab, I let it go. I don't go to AA. I don't go to any support meetings. I don't go to any therapy. I don't go to any of that. I never did. I did have to follow up with some medical help because I did so much nerve damage to my body that coming out of rehab, I walked with a cane for a year and a half because I was in so much pain all the time that I had to have help to curb that pain. But as far as support for not being an alcoholic, I quit. I'm done. And that's one of the things that I don't personally care for about AA is they make you hold on to it. You know, I have to introduce myself. I'm Larry Roberts. I'm an alcoholic. Guess what? I'm not. And just like Elsa said, I let it go. And that's what we have to do. We can't dwell on the things that we've done in the past and let that shape what we do in the future, or even shape what we do today. You know, it influences, and it definitely has a shaping factor, but it doesn't define us. We don't have to live by that definition of ourselves that we were in the past. We don't have to live by that definition of who we are today. You can make that change, but so many people, and Scott, you alluded to this as well, they don't share that story of tightening the belt. They don't share the story of, oh, we've only got one car. Oh, if I have a meeting here in Dallas, I have to work it out with my wife so I can take her to work, go to the meeting, pick her up, and I'm pulling up to the same office where I used to work. She works for the same company that I worked for. So it's a little humbling when they know we have the one car and I stepped out and I have to go drop my wife off and pick my wife up, and some of the management sees me and they go, oh, hey, Larry, how's it going? Going great. And it is going great. But I'm probably thinking they're in their head going, no, it's obviously not doing that great. You're not driving the Raptor. You're not driving the Jeep. You're driving the Ford Edge and you're picking your wife up from work. But
yeah, but it's paid for. There's no reason to be driving a Raptor when you can't afford it, or be like one of these Instagram guys that's leasing it. He doesn't own anything. You own it. And that is much more powerful. It's like the whole story of the millionaire next door.
Yeah, 100%. You don't even know.
Yeah.
You don't even know. I mean, Sam Walton drove the old beat up pickup truck all the time, you know, and he's the richest guy on the planet at the time. So that's really my message to everybody is you don't have to hold on to the past. Do what you do today. Do it by showing up everywhere you can, and do it by lifting others up and helping others along the way. And that's what's helped me is just showing up.
Larry, what's the best way for our people watching us here on Social Media Day and anybody that's listening to this in the future? What's the best way for folks to reach out to you to connect with you?
If you want to connect with me, you can go over to meetlarryroberts.com. Grab some time on my calendar. We'll do a Zoom call. I'll just get to know you and see if I can help you out anyway. Meetlarryroberts.com. I'd love to talk to you.
I love it. I love it. And guys, checking him out. Larry is doing a kick-ass job. And Larry, I just want to say I'm very proud of you, buddy. You've come a long way since we first met, and just excited at what the future holds for you. Keep kicking ass and taking names, buddy. All right.
I appreciate that, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.